Right. This is my fancy way of doing uh, doing the graphics at the beginning of a movie. So the Christopher Rolleston story. This is about a 70-year-old dark secret. It's a very dark secret. It's the real story that should have been told and become part of the folklore of the Orrowa back then in 1953. So the Christopher Rolleston story. Here it comes. Now this is going to upset people. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because his story needs to be told. But anyway, the thing about Christopher is that the thing about Christopher Rolleston is that that means that I am a bit obsessed with him. Means that it comes from the fact that I spent 23 years at Orrowa Homestead as the proprietor, and I should say now I'm going to try and I'm going to just do this as a series of videos, and I'll do 20 minutes at a time. So I was there from 1977 to 1999, and I was thrown out in the end with and I had a lease. We'd paid a lot of money for it. I worked my ass off. I did a lot of things to try and keep that place standard, and one of the main things is I just had to survive financially. I could have just run away at any time, but anyway. But the reason I was there was because Christopher Rolleston, who should have inherited the place, had died in a so-called tractor accident. Well, the reality of that is that it's not the reality. That's not how he died. And so when you sort of tell people that somebody died by a different means than what everybody believes, it's a bit over the top. But sometimes it's the reality, and that's what this is. And I'm sorry, this is my computer shining, and because I'm going to read from it. So right, I'm going to start off, and I'll try and do this piecemeal. I'm going to give myself 20 minutes, and then another 20 minutes, and it'll probably take me an hour to an hour and a half, right? And they'll be in 20-minute segments. Anyway, the first one is about Christopher. Christopher was sent to war in 1937, 38. His birthday was in sort of the 23rd of December. So, birthdays just decide when things get done. So, he didn't, the year of his birth, he didn't have much time to get anything done, really. And so I've said here, and I'm going to read snippets of this because I just can't read it all. And so I got a laptop here in front of me with all of that on it. And so anyway, off we go. I know Christopher's story because I've researched it, and I'll repeat it here more or less as I've been told it. And I've read it from various sources and with some of my own observations about world and New Zealand history thrown in to give it context. Okay. And I repeat myself because I'm old and I'm struggling. And the reason I'm doing this as a video is because I'm just having trouble getting my head around writing it all. Because, I keep repeating myself and people won't want to read that. Anyway, my understanding of Christopher's life is that he was born on the 23rd of December 1923 at the Homestead. He was, without a doubt, born into privilege in one of the grandest mansions in the nation, as the future heir of a grand home and almost 3,000-acre sheep station that supported it. So he was an only child, a son and heir. Then he was a kid on a farm, and the boss's son at that, and the heir, And so people would have had an attitude to him, and I've said that already. And we learned that around 1938, at age around 15, 14, they said 14, but, he was taken to Britain and enrolled in a military school, and I believe it might have been Sandhurst, but I don't know for sure. And I say, so I have to note that at this time, my thoughts on this matter. In fact, in the mid-30s in Germany had been preparing for war and making a very public show of it by marching up and down German streets in military uniforms and carrying on like absolute lunatics, burning synagogues and Jewish businesses. And they were on newsreels all over the world. People knew what was going on. So Christopher's parents knew what was happening there when they sent him to Sandhurst. They weren't stupid. And the other thing about all that is that Belgium and France could see all this going on, and they never got properly prepared. It shows you how deluded some governments can be, And so when Hitler decided to attack them, he just walked in the door. They just absolutely left the back door open. And so, it has its that has its sort of precedence elsewhere, I suppose. And so, but I've said here, however, the Rollestons back in New Zealand had been taking notice, and they recognised that their boy would be conscripted, and had acted to send him to a military school and give him the best possible chance of survival. That was that was what happened, or did they think they were just educating him? I don't know. I think they sent him there to protect them because his father, I think, had been in the Coldstream Guards earlier. I found an S. Rolleston in the writings about all that online. I noted. But I've said nice things here. Note also he was the son of the New Zealand heartland, and there were times when they would have been prosperous years. But then in September 1929 there was a stock market crash, and the beginning of the Great Depression that would have culminated in World War II. So the farm at that point had not had great times, I would have thought. So then in 1943, the war well underway. At 19 years of age, he graduated as an officer and was accepted into the Grenadier Guards, no less. Now there's a source of pride right there. Bullshit to that tractor accident fucking story. It doesn't do him justice. And try and remember why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I'm running out of time. So you got into the Grenadier Guards. One of Britain, the Grenadier Guards, they're the people who look after royalty. That tells us he must have been at top of class at military school to get into such an elite regiment. Or family connections, who knows? As it happens, it seems. I don't need to say that, but so he would be 19 years of age, accepted into the Guards, and he didn't turn, you got to remember, he didn't turn 20 till late December that year, 1943. Rank of second lieutenant is usually held for up to 3 years, and they can command up to 30 men. But by 1944, during most of which he was still 19, he was described as a W lieutenant, which I take to mean a war lieutenant. So he's serving and commanding men at 20 years of age, and that's something to be said for that, and that really is something. Now, because of the time in history during World War II, many very young high achievers were promoted, and very quickly, because the Allies desperately needed. So look, what this means, I've been a little bit generous with words here, but what it means is that Christopher went ashore with the Grenadier Guards because he fought in the Battle of Normandy. And so that means that they landed with the D-Day landings, maybe not on D-Day, but, they were tanks, so they would have gone in big landing ships that sort of run up to the beach and big doors open in the front. Not the ones that men come running down the ramp, tank ships. And they went ashore and they fought in the Battle of Normandy, fought their way through to the liberation of Belgium, and then the liberation of Brussels, and then on down into Germany. Now, he would have seen a whole lot of shit. And, he just would have, life would have been bloody difficult for those boys. They were just boys, and they're having to be men really early in their lives. I mean, geez, when I was 21, I can't imagine that I would have been doing anything like that. But, that generation did. They just had to grow up. So, and I've waffled on here in this thing that I've written, and they said that. So he comes back to New Zealand after the war, 1947. Then he goes back to Kenya to marry Jennifer. So he must have met her in England or something while he was there, and obviously gets her pregnant straight away. And Caroline's born that same year, 1952, and then suddenly in 1953 he dies in the so-called tractor accident. A lot of different versions of that nobody actually saw it. Nobody saw it because there were no witnesses, right? But there was a lot of supposition. A lot of it being done by a guy named Darrell Halford, who you'll hear a bit more about in this one of the next things that I do on this subject. So This is a tank commander, a guy who knows about dealing with heavy machinery and whatever, and he's got a little light tractor, and he's going to be stupid enough to drive it over a bank or watch a plane. I mean, he would have seen Spitfires and Messerschmitts and bloody Lancasters and B-29s flying all over bloody Germany. So why the hell would he care about a fucking Tiger Moth? So, I did, but back in the day when I was at Homestead, I didn't know any of that because, I didn't know that history because nobody told me. And, that's a bit bloody remiss, it seems to me, that all of that was just washed away because they didn't like the way that he died. Did him a disservice. The man got the military medal. He was a hero. He went through some of the, as a human being, he went through some of the toughest times that people get to go through, and in their lives, and the lives of all of us. I mean, he was one of the people that went over and fought the fucking Germans, and went right through. He was there. He wasn't there cooking for people at the back lines. He was there in a tank on the front line, barreling his way across bloody Germany, and you expect him to come back untarnished? What I mean by that is, do do people seriously think he's going to come back to New Zealand after all of that, with his ordinary faculties still intact? A lot of those, they were those tanks, mate. You got to understand that tanks are in the front. The tanks are lined up at the front. The tanks go in first. They're blazing away with their great big guns. Then they have to keep on driving to see what they actually did with the guns, see what had happened as a result of what they'd done. And so they would be confronted with the possibility that they were going to be cooked inside a tank every bloody minute of the day as they thundered across bloody Germany, fighting people who really didn't want to leave. And they would have been seeing some of the appalling crimes committed by the freeing Germans. And if you think that won't bend your brain, I mean, it bent my brain, and all I did was see some bloody black and white photographs of it. So, Christopher Rolleston, I got huge respect for those men in World War II. Just do. I had an uncle who was a bit doolally, but he had been at and a drunk and whatever, but he had been at Monte Casino. Death and destruction. You can't surround men with death and destruction and expect everything to remain static. They just don't. And modern people living in the life of luxury that we all do need to fucking realise that. They need to realise that a whole lot of people went to war for them. Otherwise, you'd all be bloody marching around doing what the Nazis tell you and having to kill your Jewish neighbours. There you go. But, down here it would have been the Japs. The Japanese seem to be wonderful people now, but they certainly changed their mind after the war. But it wasn't until we dropped a fucking atom bomb on them. But up until then, they'd committed some appalling atrocities. So these men that went to war saw a lot of terrible atrocities. They just saw what humans do to humans. And of course they come away in a different frame of mind. And we have to realise that. And so when poor Christopher committed suicide, they covered it up. How do I know that? A man rang me up and said Christopher Rolleston didn't die in a tractor accident. He committed suicide, and bells went off in my head. So I went and studied it. And so what's going to happen now, after this first 20-minute episode, I'm going to read to you the coroner's report. That'll be episode 2. And so, but I want to make the point that a lot of these men came back from the war emotionally and psychologically damaged. They just did. We said that's no different to having a bloody broken leg or I don't know, losing an arm, which a lot of people did in the war. So, the person who lost their arm would have the emotional disturbances associated with that as well. And so, we're talking about invisible wounds here. And I know I was born on the, why do I do this? Fuck it, I was born on the 19th of June 1941. That was my actual day when my mother squeezed me out. That was the day that Hitler set in motion the invasion of Russia. And, see what that cost in lives and problems and all the rest of it. But it also cost him the war. And so, that I don't know, do I believe in spirits or do I believe in karma or whatever? But I kind of feel as though that is part of my life. I was born on that day. And so I've made it, for some reason or another, I've always been fascinated by World War Two, and fascinated by the fact that ordinary men like me or my sons had to go over there with fucking guns and try and kill other people to stop them from killing them. And Christopher's got to be recognised for what he did. He's a war hero, and here we have the situation where because he committed suicide, all that has been concealed. And what they don't seem, but people have got to realise is that when Christopher Rolleston committed suicide, it was 90% more likely to have been as a result of his wounds in the war, because the wounds were to his mind. Get the idea. If he came back with a lot of sand in his gut, like some of those guys from the desert, and died of that, everybody would say, oh, he died of, what happened to him in the war. Christopher Rolleston, I would say, died as a result of what happened to him in the war. Give him a break. Give him a fucking break. So I'm going to tell this story, like it or not. I'm going to tell this story, I'm going to put it on YouTube, and it's going to be there for him. And people can go and find it. People need to know. They just need to know. Enough of this. And so I'm coming up for 16 minutes. I'm going to stop this now. And I'm going to, the next one is going to be a little bit more academic, because I think I'm going to read more closely from what I've already written on the issue. And the reason for that is because, I need to get that story across to you very accurately, because what I'm about to read to you contains my commentary leading up to my analysis of the coroner's report. In the coroner's report, if you tried to present a coroner's report like Christopher Rolleston's one in today's world, there would be hell to pay, because it is the most disturbing bloody series of documents that, because of the disparities between what the witnesses said, there would be, the newspapers would be our idiot newspapers wouldn't be all over it. They're too stupid these days. Journalists don't have the balls, the brains, or the integrity to tell the truth. And so there's me going off on a political rant. But the reality is that Christopher Rolleston's coroner's report is appalling, and I'm going to read it to you. Thanks. Carry on. Follow this up.